Hey guys, tonight we journey to an island where laws are not written down but spoken only. No one can pronounce them. Picture this. You step off a creaking boat just after sunset, the air thick with salt and mystery. The island looms ahead, cloaked in fog that seems just a bit too coordinated, almost as if it's hiding something. Cobblestone paths twist like question marks, and mossy walls lean in as if trying to eavesdrop. You're not entirely sure you're welcome, but also not sure you were ever really invited. And here's the kicker: you probably won't survive this place's legal system. A robed figure, face obscured, climbs onto a moss-covered platform and clears their throat with the gravity of a trial judge. Some sigh as if in agreement. A few even clap at the end. But the moment you whisper, "What did they say?" No one actually enforces these laws in a modern way. They say the language was crafted not to communicate, but to remind. Of what? Exactly. No one agrees. A few fringe theorists claim the laws are more like songs, meant to imprint patterns on the subconscious. Others think they're deliberate nonsense, spoken in a sacred dialect known only to the island's founding family. Incidentally, all disappeared 2 centuries ago, during what locals call the Great Mis... That's not exactly comforting, especially when you remember you left your hotel door unlocked and someone mentioned an unspoken rule about mirrors. Babies are said to cry differently depending on which law is being read. But by age 4, the gift fades. Some families try to preserve the knowledge by recording their toddlers, analyzing every coo and babble like CIA. No luck yet. There are no police, no written codes, yet the island runs with eerie precision. People follow invisible rules as if they were born hardwired to comply. It sounds like something between Gregorian chant and a broken fax machine. You're not sure if it's beautiful or terrifying. Streets are swept by noon. Bread is always baked in odd numbers, and yet somehow everyone obeys them. Not out of fear, not out of faith, just out of habit. And every Tuesday, a bell tolls from the cliffs, followed by a town-wide pause, where everyone holds their breath for exactly 9 seconds. To a girl beside you, she shrugs and says something about fish. Maybe. They begin to speak. No microphone, no scroll, just an ancient, sonorous chant that immediately short-circuits your understanding. A few even suggest it might have been a game that accidentally became governance. You know, like Monopoly, but with real stakes and less bankruptcy. It's not gibberish, it's not even mystical. It's just ... beyond articulation. Moments before falling off a cliff, he'd just outlawed walking on. Suspicious? Yes. Possibly apocryphal. Definitely on brand for this place. Your brain hears it. Your ears record it. But your comprehension flatlines like a cartoon anvil falling off a cliff. Not because you'll break a law, but because you won't understand any of them. Literally. The laws here are spoken aloud during public ceremonies, often from memory, sometimes while standing on a boulder that hums in the wind. Literally, scholars have tried using phonographs, reel-to-reels, even digital recorders. They capture the speaker's image just fine, but the audio comes out as distortion, like someone trying to gargle the alphabet underwater. Linguists call it a semantic black hole. Locals just say the island doesn't like being but no one, villagers included, knows what the speaker is actually saying. The words are unintelligible, peppered with glottal stops, backward consonants, and vowels that sound more like hiccups than language. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. It's always fascinating to see how far and wide our sleepy little community reaches. It might be a lullaby, or maybe a warning. You ask about the laws, and the guide chuckles, pats the stone wall, and mutters, "There in the air," whatever that means. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge uphill, following a local guide who doesn't say much, just hums, an odd, droning tune that doesn't seem to loop or repeat. In the village square, a circle of people gathers under flickering lanterns. You glance at the villagers. They nod occasionally. Here's where things get weirder. Some believe the laws were never meant to be understood in the usual sense. Historians still argue whether this island ever had a true written legal code, or whether the entire system was designed as an elaborate psychological experiment by early settlers, perhaps a protest against colonial languages. And then there's the legend of the first lawkeeper, a man said to have memorized all the rules by heart but whose final words were that "S, not what I meant." It doesn't help that every attempt to record the spoken laws ends in static. Your guide, finally breaking silence, says softly, "We don't need to know the laws. We just ... feel them." There's also a rumor that people born on the island can understand the laws for the first 3 years of life. By now, the fog has crept in again, curling around your ankles and carrying with it a faint echo of the low cant, still reverberating across the hills. So here you are, stuck on an island where no one can pronounce the laws, no one can explain them, and no one seems to care. It's enough to make you wonder, is law really about clarity or just conformity in disguise? You wake up the next morning to the sound of a bell, not a church bell, not a school bell, but something far older and less symmetrical, like someone ringing a rusted wheel rim with a spoon carved from bone. It echoes up the valley like a ripple, not loud, but insistent. You roll out of bed in your tiny slanted guest house, feet hitting the uneven wood floor with a thunk, and you realize something peculiar. Everyone's already outside. You follow the slow drift of bodies toward the law rock. It's not an especially majestic stone, more of a lump with ambitions, but it's clearly important. The path leading to it is worn smooth, lined with copper plaques that have long since lost their inscriptions. You pass an old woman holding a chicken like a bouquet. It doesn't introduce new laws, it simply acknowledges the continued existence of old ones. No one's quite sure how old. The earliest written mention of it is from a 1784 journal that describes it as a rather boring yet inexplicably moving affair in which a man on a stone sings vowels to the wind, which, honestly, checks out. The result was a 24-page sequence of glyphs that required inventing 3 new symbols just to express the vowel sounds. But in the quiet ripple of compliance that spreads across the village after it ends, markets close early, everyone walks slightly slower, doors are left ajar in case the wind needs to check inside. One boy insists he saw it steaming on a winter morning, whispering in Latin. One day, a person simply walks up and begins to speak, and everyone else nods like this is entirely normal. There's no known list, no term limits, no apparent qualifications other than the ability to climb the stone without spraining something. Words you've used forever start to sound strange. Law, rule, justice. The conversation flows in soft murmurs, half in words, half in shrugs and laughter. A teenager plucks at a 3-stringed instrument, while an elder taps their walking stick in rhythm. You ask if the law from this morning affects them. Each seems too flat, too finite for this place. You wonder if that's how the island wins by, gently untethering you from precision, one ritual at a time. Yet, once chosen, the new speaker adopts the cadence immediately, as though the language lives dormant in the soles of their feet. It's as if the chant gently resets the island's operating system. A debate still rages over whether those sounds represent archaic syllables, sonic sigils, or just the speaker having a mild allergic reaction. Some claim the laws date back to the time before boats. Answers range from "don't disturb turtles" to "all bread must now be braided." Geologists traced its mineral composition to a volcanic region nearly 200 miles away. The prevailing theory is that it was carried here deliberately, by raft, by whale, or possibly by a group of very determined monks, with strong shoulders and weak navigational instincts. No one knows why. The rock has no inscriptions, no carvings, just a smooth indentation at the top, where generations of feet have stood and pronounced laws no one understands. No two people agree. One man even claims that today's chant was actually a weather forecast. Others say they were brought here by a man who had no tongue and communicated by carving holes in driftwood. She smiles at you, toothless but serene, and whispers something that sounds like He never looks at the speaker, only at the sand. At the base of the law rock, a procession begins. A cloaked figure different from last night, you think, though the robes make it hard to tell, climbs onto the stone, balances carefully, and begins to chant. Again, you recognize the cadence, but not the meaning. It's more musical this time, with strange lilts and drawn-out vowels that seem designed to lull, not instruct. A few villagers close their eyes. Some sway gently, one begins to knit. The ritual has an atmosphere somewhere between a legal ceremony and a bedtime story. If bedtime stories could get you arrested for stepping on moss after sundown, it lasts exactly 18 minutes. You know this because a local man in suspenders is holding an hourglass, flipping it with a dramatic gesture at the exact midpoint. When it ends, the crowd bows not to the law rock, not to the speaker, but to each other. You bow too, unsure what else to do. Someone hands you a pear and says, "For your silence." You're beginning to suspect that this island might run entirely on metaphor. This particular ritual, you learn later, is called the recitation of recitation. Historians still argue whether the law rock ceremony has any functional legal authority, or if it is just a symbolic holdover from pre-literate governance. You try to ask a few islanders what today's ceremony meant. Linguists once attempted to map the ceremony phonetically. One thing's clear: the ceremony has power, not in a tangible, gavel-slam way, and here is a quirky twist. The law rock itself, isn't native to the island. Even stranger, that indentation never collects water. Rain falls, dew settles, but the dip stays dry. Some say it's cursed. Others believe it's sanctified. The lawkeepers, the ones who read the laws, are chosen without ceremony. No lawkeeper has ever explained how they know what to say. They just ... do. You begin to feel the edges of your own language fray a little. That evening, a small gathering takes place in a garden behind the inn. Tea is served in cracked blue cups. Maybe, someone says, but we won't know until someone breaks it. The next morning, you wake to birdsong. That sounds suspiciously like whispering. It's probably just your imagination. But when you lean out your window, one of the birds seems to stop mid-chirp. Library is a generous term. It's a single room attached to the post office, filled with hand-bound volumes, none of which have titles. The air smells like old parchment and sea salt, and there's a strange static buzz that seems to hum from the wooden beams and tilt its head at you like it knows something. A good omen, a bad omen, or just another day on the island where the very air feels like it's holding its breath. He squints at it, then laughs softly. "Ah, yes," he says, "the letter we no longer say, but even they admit that the unpronounceable symbols in the island's law books don't march any known language tree. they just exist. Apparently, the island's native language included not just unfamiliar words, but actual phonemes, those tiny building blocks of sound that are no longer used anywhere on Earth, and left the island with a speech pattern so altered that his family could no longer understand him. He insisted he'd uncovered a fourth glottal state, something beyond voiced, voiceless, or nasalista, vocal limbo. The teacher, a woman in her 60s with 2 pencils behind one ear, tells you the kids are preparing their tongues for law literacy. Children under the age of 3 often mimic the law chant flawlessly. Others say that would be chaos, and frankly, not much worse than what they already have. Parents record them obsessively, treating baby talk like sacred scripture. If you ever hear this sound clearly, run. It means the law has woken up. He demonstrates by tapping his sternum, humming, then exhaling sharply through his nose while moving his lips in circular motions. It looks ridiculous. It sounds like static wrapped in a sneeze, but it leaves you with... One popular theory is that infants retain a pre-verbal memory of the ancient tongue-linguistic window that closes with age. The moment a child learns to say no, the theory goes, they forget how to speak the law. That is, training their mouths to one day pronounce impossible. You listen closely and realize, no joke, they are making noises you didn't know humans could make. One boy chirps like a malfunctioning wind chime. Another girl clicks her teeth in a rhythm that syncs with the teacher's tapping foot. It's part music, part Morse code, and all deeply unsettling. His final journal entry simply reads, "I don't speak anymore. I resonate." Shopkeepers will sometimes mutter a soundless syllable when handing you change. Children playing near the cliffs occasionally shout words that make no sound, then collapse in laughter. To them, the laws are not meant to be spoken like instructions. They're performed, or invoked, or maybe remembered by muscle memory alone. One woman tells you, it's like singing a song you don't know until you hum it. That would be poetic, if it weren't also how they sentence people for breaking unknown rules. At the dock, you see a fisherman whisper into the wind before casting his line. The lips move, but nothing comes out. After breakfast, dense slice of bread filled with anise seeds and wrapped in something that might once have been cabbage. You find yourself pulled toward the village light. You're searching for answers about the language, the one no one can pronounce properly. And right away, you notice something strange in the texts. A recurring letter that doesn't exist. It's shaped like an upside-down lowercase g, with a diagonal line through it. Sometimes it's at the beginning of a word, sometimes the end. At least, not anymore. Some blame evolutionary changes, not aliens. Thankfully we're not going full tinfoil here, but perhaps whales, or birds, or some deep-sea creature with a very creative sense of grammar. One scholar wrote a paper suggesting the laws were once sung underwater, meant to be echoed through coral reefs. Others claim the knowledge was taken deliberately. The silencing, as some elders call it, like it was a theft. In one book, it appears alone on an entire page. Like a riddle or an accusation, you show the character to the librarian. A thin man in socks and sandals who smells faintly of vinegar. Linguists have catalogued hundreds of languages with obscure clicks, tones, and trills, but this island's tongue has an entire category of unvoicables, sounds that can be physically produced by the human mouth. There's a fringe theory that the language originally belonged to another species entirely. Historians still argue whether this unspeakable language was ever fully real or just an exaggerated dialect, perhaps a mix of multiple ancient tongues fused by isolation and ritual. Even today, the remnants of this impossible language crop up in daily life. A well-documented case involved a German linguist named Horst Keller, who spent 3 years trying to mimic the lost speech. Quirky as it sounds, the islanders don't see this as a mystery. Your curiosity takes you to a schoolhouse, where a group of children are reciting rhymes that sound less like nursery songs and more like encryption keys. And yet here comes a twist. There is one group on the island who can pronounce every sound perfectly. Naturally, this has sparked debate. Should the island switch to toddler juggers? Some elders say yes. You finally meet one of the few remaining phonetic keepers, an elderly man with an accordion strapped to his back, who claims to be able to feel the lost sounds in his chest. He hands you a small stone engraved with the forbidden letter and says, "What does that mean?" He doesn't say. You're restarting to notice a pattern on this island. Every answer comes bundled with at least 2 new mysteries. Just when you think you're catching the rhythm of life, hear quiet mornings, whispered laws, polite shrugs of confusion. You stumble across something that reroutes your understanding all over again. This time, it's a garden. It's enclosed by a low stone wall covered in symbols, some familiar, some looking suspiciously like they were scratched by someone blindfolded and sneezing. The gate is unlocked, swinging gently in the breeze. No signs say to enter, but none say to stay out, either which you're beginning to realize might be an invitation. Comforting, not just any garden, mind you. Inside, the air smells of thyme, lavender, and something metallic. A small footpath winds through patches of fragrant herbs and orderly vegetables. But they live in the nicest houses. They wear deep green, and when they speak at town meetings, people listen and, more importantly, obey. And there, in the middle of it all, stands a pedestal with a heavy iron plaque. The plaque reads, "Would you like to hear a law only we know?" He whispers. He smiles without showing teeth and offers you a seat on a bench carved from driftwood. "You'll hear about the code, yes?" he asks, in a voice so calm it could double as herbal tea. "By order of Article V, entry is welcomed only in the presence of the unknowing," which is a roundabout way of saying you probably allowed in because you have no idea what's going on. A man in a linen vest appears, seemingly out of nowhere. You nod cautiously. He explains that some people on the island gust a few clay to understand the laws, not because they read them or hear them, but because they were born with the mouth memory, a term that sounds like either mysticism or an excellent indie band. Sometimes they're about ritual, sometimes theater, sometimes they just exist to exist. Like an inside joke no one remembers starting. These self-appointed interpreters are known as they're not elected, they're not appointed, and they hold no official title. There's an underground group, no official name, though some call them the Echo who argue that the laws are deliberately incomprehensible so that the elite can manipulate the rest. They wear blue sashes, speak only in palindromes, and occasionally interrupt village events by honking like geese. Their stated goal is auditory equality. Whatever that means, you get the sense that compliance here is more about gesture than consequence. When someone breaks a rule like humming on a no-humming day, or eating pears on an even-numbered date, they don't get fined or jailed. They get frowned at. Or worse, they get interpreted. Historians still argue whether the articulates are legitimate guardians of the law or just very confident con artists. An articulate will approach the offender and explain, using ambiguous metaphors and a lot of raised eyebrows, why their behavior was contradictory to the current climate of lawfulness. There's no appeal. There's not even a verdict. The sun is setting, and the strange plaque seems to glow faintly in the orange light. You try pronouncing the phrase carved into it, but your tongue stumbles halfway through. You taste copper, just a shared moment of awkward silence, and then a gift basket of thyme and radishes to help you reflect. One woman proudly tells you she hasn't tea obeyed a single law since she was 19, and nothing has happened that once a bird flew into her house and laid an egg in her soup. She's still not sure if that was punishment or just a very strange Tuesday. Some suggest they inherited fragments of real legal tradition passed down in families. Others think it's all a bluff, a centuries-long game of charades that got out of hand. After all, if no one can prove what the laws actually say, then who's to say they don't mean whatever you want them to? The man in the vest leans in. Of course you do. He recites it slowly. On the third sunrise of the waxing moon, no shadows may cross the fifth path while birds are bathing. You blink. That's real. He nods solemnly. Violators must hum. You ask, what happens if someone crosses the path anyway? He smiles again. We forgive them. Loudly. You're beginning to understand that laws here don't always prescribe punishment. Of course, this arrangement has critics. You see a flyer pinned to a tree that reads, "If nitrogen monoxide one can pronounce, IT doesn't apply." Written in Latin, some villagers ignore the articulates completely. Yet the system endures. Interpretation is a kind of social court. This odd but persistent structure raises a big question. Can a law still function if it only exists in the minds of a few and the rituals of the many? You find a small book in the library donation box titled "The Myth of the Code." Inside, a quote jumps out at you. Power in the absence of language is theatre. Theatre in the absence of power is folklore. The law here is both. It's a pretty sentence, maybe even a true one. The man in the linen vest finally excuses himself, leaving you alone in the garden. Whatever the law says, you suspect you've just broken it. The island is quiet at night to quiet. If you ask your nerves, not eerie, exactly, but ... anticipatory. As if the land itself is waiting for someone to mess up, you find yourself walking slowly, listening to your own footsteps, and wondering if those count as disturbing the peace here. By the time you return to your guest house, the innkeeper is sweeping the same spot he's been sweeping since morning. You ask if he ever stops. Only when the law allows it. He says, smiling faintly. You don't press further. You're not sure if it's a joke, or a threat, or some blend of the two. The next day, something strange happens, stranger than usual, which on this island is saying a lot. Someone died on a Tuesday. A death is announced. Well, kind of. It's an actual statute, or at least a widely accepted belief, that dying on that particular day is illegal. The origin, murky. The enforcement, even murkier. A small piece of paper is tacked to the village notice board with 3 simple words. Tuesday, died anyway. That's it. No name, no date, no elaboration. You stare at it for a long moment, trying to decode it. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, they're all represented, but not a single soul is officially buried with a Tuesday expiration date. When you point this out to a passing caretaker, he just nods. Apparently, a death on Tuesday triggers a peculiar response protocol. The body is held in a special cold room, and a quiet ceremony is performed in which the deceased is symbolically postponed. The law interpreters gather, speak the delay words, which, naturally, no one can translate, and the death is reclassified to Wednesday, no matter what the actual clock says. We fudged the paperwork, he says. We're not monsters. Then it hits you. A man who died suddenly heart failure, they think, and whose family insisted on telling the truth. They buried him with a marker that clearly said Tuesday. No admissions, no the staff still show up, wear their scrubs, drink their tea, but no one treats anyone. No Tuesday babies. Someone tells you with pride, not since the fire. They say it's a spiritual closure day. If you happen to go into labor on a Tuesday, the nurses will hum lullabies and quietly ask you to hold it until midnight. The next morning, the marker was blank. Just ... gone. No name, no date. Just a smooth stone. When the family replaced it, the new marker vanished too. It was immediately banned, though not by any official council. A shared agreement to suspend disbelief, to collectively bend reality around ritual and rhythm, not as edicts or threats, but as protective stories, soft spells, guardrails against chaos, even if they make no sense, especially when they don't. The villagers just refused to print, bind, or acknowledge it. When the scholar attempted to read it aloud at the Law Rock, he was politely but firmly drowned out by a spontaneous children's choir. The third time, it came back upside down. After that, they stopped trying. A retired schoolteacher says it breaks the weekly rhythm. A girl selling pickled turnips says, very seriously, that if you die on Tuesday, your spirit gets stuck in the municipal well until Thursday afternoon. And apparently, that's not allowed. Yes, you read that right on this island, there's a law that bans death on Tuesdays. It's not a superstition. You start asking around. Some records suggest it began during a drought when a series of unfortunate deaths clustered on a string of Tuesdays. So to avoid haunting bureaucratic limbo, they just outlawed dying that day. The elders responded by declaring Tuesdays sacred pause days for the soul. An old fisherman tells you that dying on a Tuesday confuses the ancestors. Historians still argue whether this law originated from an actual event, an ancient tragedy that occurred on a Tuesday, or whether it is just one of those traditions that spiraled out of control. As one theory goes, early villagers believed that every soul required a clear exit lane to the afterlife, and Tuesday being the third day was the cosmic traffic jam. And for the most part, people obey it. You visit the small, grassy cemetery just outside the village, and sure enough, every gravestone skips Tuesdays. It raises the question, what happens when someone does die on a Tuesday? You finally get a partial answer from a woman who introduces herself as the interim whaling clerk. The entire island plays along. It's a collective lie that everyone agrees to believe. And yet, you've heard whispers about one person who refused. Some say his ghost can be heard laughing every Tuesday night, drifting through the village square like a late-night breeze. Others claim they've seen the man himself, walking the fifth path with no shadow. No one tries to explain it logically. On this island, logic is a bit like trying to use a fork to eat soup. Noble, but pointless. A fringe scholar once tried to publish a paper called Temporal Disobedience and the Legal Fiction of Death. Another curious detail, hospitals on the island shut down every Tuesday. The record for longest Tuesday delay, 11 hours. The baby was born at exactly 12:01 a.m. And the island rang bells all night in celebration. You don't ask about the fire. The more you learn, the more the Tuesday death law starts to feel less like folklore and more like a social contract. You can't help but wonder, is this how all laws started? And then it occurs to you maybe the laws here were never meant to control people. Maybe they were meant to comfort them, even if that comfort comes in the form of pretending that death takes holidays. You spend the following morning tracing a narrow trail up a hill known locally as Echoous Reach. The name, at first, seems poetic, maybe even quaint. But as the path curls higher, you start to understand. Every footstep you take returns to you with unsettling clarity, the sound bouncing off rock in slow, deliberate waves. Birds chirp once, then twice more in repetition. Even your breath seems to echo louder than it should. At the top, there's no monument, just a cave, wide, dark, and humming. But when disputes arise, land disagreements, inheritance, confusion, someone allegedly eating someone else's ceremonial yam. The villagers bring the matter here. Into the dark, into the cave, not their complaint, not their side of the story, just their names. Then they wait. That's precisely what they do, and, astonishingly, people accept it. This, you're told, is where the island holds its trials. Sort of. Yes, there is no courthouse here, no juries, no robes, or it's called Judgment by Echo, and it works exactly how it sounds. The process goes like this. The two parties involved walk into the cave, one by one, and announce their names to the silence. Some suggest it was once metaphorical, an allegory for hearing truth, in silence that became literal over time. Others think it was invented by a group of bored teenagers and just stuck. And whatever name, the echo repeats loudest. The echo was a kind of pronunciation check. If the word bounced back, it was said correctly. If not, it was forbidden from use. A crude but effective phonetic editor. That's the winner. You hear that and think, surely not. Surely they don't base justice on acoustics. You attend a proceeding yourself. Occasionally, maybe once a decade, the cave says nothing. That's called a silent rejection. It's kept in a locked chest beneath the floorboards of the inn, in a journal labeled Nope. You're shown it only briefly. Inside, written in neat ink, are entries like, when it happens, both parties are required to return home, eat pickled root vegetables in silence, and never speak of the dispute again. It becomes, officially, an unresolvable matter. A ghost law, they call that. No one's sure what happens after, but it's said that during the last one, 4 entire families left the island and never returned. Their houses were reclaimed by mass and rules. 2 sisters are arguing over a fence, whether it marks the property line or cuts through shared land. It's not just sound, it's identity. You must say who you are, and the cave decides what that's worth. Would that give them an unfair advantage? The villagers assure you that the cave is more fair than fair. Spoke your own name. Would it echo back? Would it amplify? Or would it disappear entirely? Long ago, it was a temple, one that sank into the earth after a priest mispronounced a sacred syllable during a festival. The villagers found the crater the next morning, perfectly round, perfectly silent, until someone dared to speak a name, and the cave responded, not in echo, but in full voice. Too late, which is not the same thing as accurate, but seems to be enough for them. They each walk into the cave, about 20 feet in. The cave, by the way, smells faintly of sulfur and crushed limes, which is confusing and irrelevant. The cave takes it out of human hands. No bribery, no bias, just resonance. People trust sound more than speech here, especially sound they didn't create. The first sister says her name with conviction. Marielle. It bounces back. Marielle. The second steps forward. The cave waits, then answers, Seda, Seda, Seda. The crowd gasps softly. It's done. The verdict is final. No one argues, no appeals. The sound has spoken. The land is Seda's now. You want to ask, what if someone has a naturally echo-friendly name? Something sharp and bouncy like Echo or Bobo. Historians still argue whether Judgment by Echo originated as an ancient spiritual ritual or simply as a workaround for the lack of literate scribes. There is even a theory that the cave was once used to test the island's early language. The villagers, of course, don't care about any of that. To them, the cave has one job: to echo honestly. It doesn't always work, though, and yes, there's a running list of such matters. The rooster who claimed tax exemption, 2 cousins who argued about a dream, the tree that sang but only in Greek, You'd think the unpredictability of sound would make people nervous, but in a way, that's the point. And then there's the folklore. They say the cave wasn't always a cave. Now, it merely repeats. But some believe it still listens. A few villagers whisper that if the wrong name wins too many times, the cave will go silent again for a century. Another curious detail. If someone walks into the cave and says a name that is not theirs, it won't echo at all. You consider, for a moment, what would happen if you stepped inside. You don't test it. You just listen. After the cave, you start hearing the phrase Grandmother's tongue whispered around the island like a bedtime spell. It's not a language in the traditional sense, not something you can learn from a book or a CD, with a perky narrator and cheerful pronunciation guides. No, this tongue lives in fragments, in lullabies, in soup recipes, in the strange way people pause before saying thank you at dusk. It lives in the old, you meet your first speaker of it, a woman named Noliat, the base of a dried-up stream bed, where she est pulling herbs from the ground and placing them gently in a pouch made from braided red. She's short, hunched, with eyebrows that arch so dramatically they seem to point out nearby crimes. It's the ancestral dialect, used mostly by the elderly when they want to scold or bless or confuse their grandchildren. No one under 60 can speak it fluently. And even those who can often forget key parts, that doesn't seem to bother anyone. The forgetting, you're told, is part of the tradition. You noticed younger islanders often pause when making decisions, glance toward a group of seated elders, and wait for a subtle nod or shake of the head. No words, just deference. When you ask her about the laws, she grins and replies in something that sounds like a sigh followed by a hiccup and a rolling RRR that vibrates your ribcage. Legal matters sometimes defer entirely to grandmother's tongue interpretations. If there's confusion about a chant, a ritual, or a law whose echo came back with two names instead of one, someone will ask Nali or another elder for the real meaning. Nali agrees, amused. She speaks into the microphone for 7 minutes straight, in a flow that feels somewhere between a sermon and a dream. It's meant to die and be reborn every time it's spoken. When you play it back, the audio is scrambled. No static, no voice, just silence. You try again, same result. The villagers are not surprised. The room goes still. Even the children sit quietly, watching the speaker with wide eyes. You don't know what she's saying, but your throat tightens anyway, as if your body understands what your mind can't. When it ends, no one claps. They just breathe. What follows is never translated. Just a murmur, a sigh, and an agreement. He'll whisper a phrase in your ear. If you remember it upon waking, you're duty-bound to speak it aloud at dawn. Instead, they use a word that loosely means what holds, as in, the part that stays when the rest forgets. No one knows what happens if you don't. No one seems willing to try. He says his wife stopped speaking anything but the grandmother's tongue during her final years. It sleeps in people's throats. It waits in lullabies. It curls into the silence between arguments. And when the doctors gave her 3 months to live, she outlasted them by 2 years. The words wouldn't let her go, he says, with the quiet certainty of someone who's made peace with magic. Disputes dissolve. You don't understand it, of course. 2 old men laughing in the market, muttering what might be a weather forecast or a very specific insult. A woman singing to her chickens in a rhythm that feels like law but sounds like lullaby. One night, you pass a group of elders sitting around a fire, whispering stories to one another in the tongue. They fall into silence when they see you, smiling politely. Not secretive, just private, like a club that doesn't recruit. You ask if she can translate. She just pats your hand and says, "It's not a language for ears, it's for memory. Not in books, not carved in stone, not even in old letters or records." Historians still argue whether the grandmother's tongue was deliberately unwritten to keep it sacred, or if it simply resisted transcription, too tonal, too breathy, too shaped by emotion to live on paper. A few fringe theorists even suggest it was never a spoken language at all, but a kind of gestural hum passed from throat to throat, like a melody half remembered after a dream. According to the villagers, the grandmother's tongue is the closest anyone comes to actually speaking the laws. No, the strange thing, the tongue shows up nowhere in writing. You catch pieces of it as you wander the village. There's a saying here. What the grandmothers say goes. It's not official policy, but it's widely accepted. It's not just social. No one ever demands a full explanation. That, apparently, would be rude. You find an old tape recorder in the library destination bin and ask if you can record a few phrases. The tongue doesn't like being repeated. Someone says, you attend a birthday celebration where an elder delivers a toast entirely in the grandmother's tongue. Later that night, someone tells you that one of the phrases she used roughly translates to, "Remember the law that remembers you." You ask what that means. They shrugged. One elderly man claims the tongue has healing powers, not in a mystical energy sort of way, but in the literal ability to slow illness. A different elder claims it once caused a tree to burst into flame. Opinions vary. There's also the claim that if you dream in the grandmother's tongue, you'll be visited by the first lawkeeper in your sleep. Curiously, there's no word in the tongue for truth. And isn't that exactly what the law is supposed to be? The tongue might not be fully alive anymore, but it's not dead either. And somehow, even though no one can speak it fluently, everyone still listens when it's spoken, even you. You begin to notice more and more that time behaves strangely on this island, not just in the "I lost track of the afternoon" sense, but in a deeply structural, mildly conspiratorial, possibly illegal kind of way. The clocks here don't agree with each other. The sundials contradict the bells, and when you ask a child what time it is, they respond with, "Probably not yet," which is not comforting. You first suspect something is wrong when you try to attend the village's midweek gathering. Apparently, as the fourth day circle, you arrive at what should be late afternoon, only to find the chairs already being folded and tea crumbs dotting the grass. You're early for next week. Someone tells you, you look at your watch. It says Wednesday. They say it's already Thursday. You ask when the day changed. They say it didn't, or rather, it uses 4 of them, depending on context. There's the sun calendar, the tide calendar, the legal calendar, and the ceremonial calendar. Depending on the humidity, you see one with days labeled not Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but first tide, second chant, drift eve. Inside are dozens of parchment scrolls, each marked with vague date stamps like year of fog or soon after the goat incident. It's on a mood. Some are simply dated before, with no clarification. None of these are consistent from week to week. One label simply says, might rain. That's apparently a day. They all count time differently, and of course they all disagree. The law hasn't declared me older yet, he shrugs. I'm stuck at 48. Apparently, official aging requires ceremonial acknowledgement. If the village fails to perform the age hearing, you don't legally get older. That means no new responsibilities, no new taxes, and yes, even your birthday is postponed. Until further notice, you consider whether the humidity is making you hallucinate. His family insists he's still the baker who sold him a teen cake disagrees. The case has been referred to Echo's Reach. sometimes linear, sometimes swirling, always shifting. Days don't begin, they emerge, and when they do, they carry expectations. No rule here is fixed forever. Laws are written into cycles, each tied to seasons, stars, or moods. Some are dormant. Some only activate during specific wind conditions. One law, you're told, only applies if it rains while the frogs are facing east. Another kicks in when two people accidentally wear the same color socks and make eye contact near the well. Today's a good day for regrets, one woman tells you. Yesterday was better for confessions. Later, a shopkeeper confirms your suspicions. The island doesn't use a fixed calendar. As the wind passes through, different tones emerge. The pitch, volume, and order of the whistles help locals determine the current temporal mood. It's less about precision and more about vibe. If the wind plays a low tone, it might be time to begin a task. You don't obey because of threat. You obey because you feel it's time. The law hums through daily life like a distant drumbeat. You don't follow rules, Hyrule, move with them. Someone gasps. Oh, they whisper, a double dusk. If it squeals sharply, stop what you're doing. If it goes silent, take a nap. Want to schedule a meeting? You'd better specify which system you're using. One fringe theory suggests the island was caught in a cartographic dispute between two empires, and to avoid conquest by either, it adopted a system of time that made scheduling an invasion logistically impossible. Most islanders keep a small chart pinned to the wall near their front door that cross-references the calendars like a puzzle. Historians still argue whether the island's temporal confusion is a byproduct of isolation, a failed colonial experiment, or a deliberate effort to remain unconscious. This idea gains some traction when you learn that even court dates are fluid. A trial set for the third echo of the second chant after the sixth rain might actually occur next month, or tomorrow. You visit the law records office, or rather, the drawer in the post office labeled important-ish. Oddly enough, no one seems bothered by this. You ask how they manage consistency. The clerk, a woman who is simultaneously crocheting and sipping soup, explains, the law isn't on a schedule. She doesn't elaborate. The islanders use a timekeeping device called a whistle dial. It's a thin metal disc with 7 holes punched around its edge. You begin to understand why no one here wears a watch. You meet a man who insists he hasn't aged in 5 years. Not biologically. There is a legal debate happening right now over a boy who turned 13. Age hearing was interrupted by a rogue rooster. Meanwhile, you see someone updating the public calendar, a stone slab near the market with this week's prediction. Likely between the days. Proceed with courtesy, and they do. People here treat time not like a line, but like weather. This fluidity seeps into their understanding of law. 2. This isn't anarchy. It's rhythm. The elders describe it as law through listening. Of course, this means no one's ever quite sure when something is truly illegal. You ask, what happens if someone breaks a law they didn't know was currently active? The reply, if no one else felt it, it didn't happen. You write that down very slowly. At sunset, the bells ring in a pattern you've never heard before. 5 tones, then silence, then 5 more. You don't ask, you just sit, watching shadows stretch twice as long as usual, and wonder if maybe, just maybe, time isn't about clocks at all. Maybe it's about attention. Maybe this entire island runs not on hours and minutes, but on how closely people are willing to listen. And here, people listen very, very closely. You wake up one morning to find a loaf of bread on your doorstep, shaped like a spiral and dusted with something that smells faintly of fennel and mystery. There's no note, no footprints, just bread, You eat it anyway, because, of course you do. When pressed, they explain that sometimes, when the laws shift, the island responds by baking. Not as a metaphor, not as a tradition, as a legal update. Later, a neighbor casually mentions, the bread of amendment. Lucky you. Yes, on this island, amendments to the law are announced through pastries. Apparently, the bread you received means a rule has been revised. If it's made with anise, it likely pertains to behavior near water. If fennel, interpersonal conduct. If the crust is overly browned, it means the change was controversial. Yours is quite dark. No one will say which one. That's part of the system. You have to feel what's changed. Some say you'll notice it in conversation, people speaking differently, adjusting their behavior without knowing why. He does not bake for flavor, he says, he bakes for correction. This one is for retraction, he says grimly. Someone spoke a law they did not earn. There are records of legal declarations tied to feasting across many cultures, but nowhere else has the recipe been the ruling. She usually announces daily behavioral suggestions through a conch shell. Today, the shell sits untouched on her porch, and her socks are matched, a cultural sign of intentional penance. It's not written down. The recipe, the chant, the shaping it, all lives in motion. A legal ballet performed in yeast and flour. Others claim the bread itself contains clues. The shape, the flavor, the timing. You're told that spiral-shaped loaves usually signal a reversing of a previous law. Historians still argue whether this culinary code developed out of necessity, when ink was scarce and food abundant, or whether it was part of a religious tradition long forgotten. This has reportedly led to incidents where people began walking backwards, sleeping upside down, or offering polite handshakes to goats. The villagers aren't bothered. Every law has its season. They say some just take longer to digest. You don't move, you don't blink. The dog winks. One was the brief prohibition of whistling at dusk, which resulted in accidental arrests when people whistled in their sleep. The second banned all hand gestures on ceremonial grounds for 24 hours, which halted commerce, flirtation, and most forms of parental discipline. No one liked it. The very next day, the bakers produced emergency buns, shaped like open palms and sweetened with honey. The law melted away. That the law, to truly be baked in, must undergo a process of rising, shaping, and finishing. And if they say a pastry means peace, people behave more kindly. If the croissants are crescent-shaped with clove and lemon, people keep their voices down. Still not sure what rule you've agreed to, but feeling godly better about it. If the scones contain black sesame, you stay indoors after dark. No one questions it. They don't have to. Only then can it be consumed literally and internalized. One particularly poetic line reads, "In the village bakery, a sign hangs above the oven. This is the bread of repeal," she says, very seriously. "I'm helping undo a leash ordinance. Proofing equals interpreting." You ask the baker about this. He wears a hat made of woven lavender stems and only speaks in third person. If the baker refuses to make a law bread, the law loses strength. If the bread burns, the law is said to be unstable. There's even a small shrine in the bakery's corner, where villagers leave slices of old amendments as offerings, usually beside dried flowers or bits of string. It smells like memory. He lets you observe the morning bake, and sure enough, each loaf is kneaded, while a chant is murmured, not aloud, not even fully formed, just something in the back of the throat, like a memory of a song hummed underwater. You watch as one assistant braids 3 long strands of dough together, while another nods in time with a silent metronome. The room smells like time and history. When a particularly complex loaf comes out twisted, filled with pear paste, and dotted with tiny herbs, the baker frowns. You don't know what that means. But later that day, the town's self-appointed interpretive ambassador goes suspiciously silent. Meanwhile, you hear villagers muttering things like, "It's a pear bread week," and adjusting their schedules accordingly. You come across an old scroll in the library with the heading, "When the oven becomes the pen." The scroll theorizes that the oven is not just a place of heat, but of transformation. What the mouth consumes, the body obeys. A fringe belief on the island holds that if you eat a loaf during the wrong moon phase, you'll misunderstand the law it represents. You spot a child offering pieces of flatbread to passing dogs. That night, a dog walks calmly into the town square, sits on the fountain's edge, and stares directly at you for 10 full seconds. You decide not to think too hard about it. As the days pass, you realize that baking is more than symbolism, it's enforcement. There are only 2 known instances where a law was declared entirely without bread. Both were said to cause chaos. The bakers never talk politics, but they hold more power than anyone else. No one elects them. No one replaces them. You finally ask someone what happens if someone eats the wrong bread. The reply, then they learn the law meant for someone else. You ask, and if they eat no bread at all? The answer, then they forget the law completely. You think about that as you eat the last bite of your amendment spiral. Somewhere between the bakery and the southern cliffs, you find the archive that isn't there. It is not marked on any map, not that the maps here are trustworthy, but enough people mention it in passing that you figure it must exist. Eventually, a fisherman tells you, "Oh, the archive." Just walk until you feel like you forgot why. You begin to feel ... off. Not lost, exactly, just subtly misaligned. You take 2 steps forward and swear the ground creaks like wood, even though it's stone. So you do. You walk. No dusty tones or cracked spines. Just whispers, faint ones, echoing softly from tiny holes in the walls, barely audible unless you press your ear close. Each hole is labeled with a word or a symbol, some just with colors. You pass mossy stones, a ladder leading nowhere, and a tree with 15 scarves tied to it all, the same shade of red. Then you see it, a low structure, barely taller than a man, nestled between 2 ancient trees. The doorway is shaped like a keyhole, no hinges, no knob. The whispers are fragments of laws, precedents, and interpretations. They're stored in sound alone, like oral footnotes in a language no one truly speaks. You knock anyway, because you're polite, and the wall simply slides open like it had been waiting. Inside, there are no shelves, no scrolls. You approach one marked ceremony. You hear, they don't use it often, only when a law is forgotten but felt. When the village senses something missing, you can't request a law, you just sit and wait. Sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. There is a small cushion in the corner where you find a half-finished embroidery of a goat eating a scroll. Apparently, even patience is allowed a sense of humor, a faint tension in the wind, a disagreement about a ritual that used to be automatic. That's when someone makes the long walk and listens. Only count the steps if you forget the destination, and you must never try to guess what a whisper means out loud. That last rule is posted on the lintel, in 5 languages, including to you don't recognize. Another labeled disobedience. He wore the wrong hat on the right day. We applauded. Oh, that's probably about the old fairy paths. Some believe it's a legal fail-safe, a place where the purest forms of rules live, safe from interpretation, distortion, or misuse. Others say it's a prank built by a long-dead trickster council. You realize quickly, this archive isn't for reading, it's for remembering. And only if you already almost remember. And then silence. You stay very still. Eventually, the warmth returns. You bow awkwardly, in case that helps. You meet a merchant who claims he once heard a whisper say, "All debts are forgiven on the seventh leap," and immediately tore up his ledgers. That leap never came. He's still in business. Somehow, one woman once tried to transcribe them. She brought in a notebook and a quill, sat by a dozen of the holes, and wrote down every word. When she left, she realized her notes were all the same sentence, repeated over and over. The ones you don't learn but remember. The way you hesitate before a lie. The way you pause before speaking a name. The feeling that some things should be done just so, even if you don't know why. There's no list, just a set of carved dates, each marked with a spiral. It only asks to be heard, briefly, like catching the tail of a story you know you dreamed but can't quite name. Couldn't risk invalid vows, she explained. The couple got married the next day under a tarp. Problem solved. Apparently, when a whisper changes, the stone is updated. You retold, only one person on the island can hear when that happens. The listener, a woman who lives behind the bakery and speaks only on even-numbered days. You weren't meant to hold this. She burned the notebook herself. Then, without prompting, she whispers, "The rule about carrying oranges changed last week, but no one's needed it yet." Historians still argue whether the archive predates written law on the island, or whether it was created to contain dangerous truths that shouldn't be committed to paper. The locals just call it the Whisper House. The process is never rushed. There are rules, of course. You may not enter with shoes that have laces. You must speak no louder than a whisper yourself. You break it by accident. You step away from a hole labeled migration and mutter, the walls sigh. Just a little. You freeze. The temperature drops. One of the whisper holes emits a high-pitched giggle or scream, you can't tell which. Outside, you find a smooth stone labeled known revisions. You visit her. She offers you pickled figs and says nothing for 10 full minutes. You blink. She smiles. You learn later that she once stopped a wedding because the law about hand-holding in rainfall had expired. The archive is rarely mentioned in legal disputes. It's treated more like a dream everyone has at some point, then pretends they didn't. One whisper reportedly said, "There were never laws. Just excellent timing." That one got recorded in someone's song and banned for 5 years for causing chronic shrugs. But the whispers persist, and unlike the law, rock, the cave, or even the bread, the archive doesn't ask to be understood. And maybe that's the point. Maybe law isn't always about structure or wording. Maybe it's about the parts that live in your body. The island seems to run on those feelings. And this little echoing archive that doesn't technically exist might be where they all begin. You step away from the wall and whisper your own name into the silence. Just once. No echo, no response. But for a moment, you feel known. There's a curious tradition involving the island's clocks, or rather, what passes for clocks. Here, you find yourself drawn to the village square at midday, where a peculiar device sits atop a worn stone pedestal. It looks nothing like a normal clock. Its flags signal the state of law on any given day. At one point, 2 flags overlap perfectly, causing a minor uproar. Someone rushes over, taps the clock gently, and the flags settle. It's a subtle ritual, repeated every day, but the law doesn't. The clock just needs a moment to remember. If a flag points toward the east, it means new statutes are in effect. South signals a period of legal calm. West warns of impending disputes. And north? That's the flag for pause everything and wait. You start to notice patterns. Certain flag combinations correspond with local events. A wedding, a market day, even a quiet Sunday when no laws seem to apply. The villagers call this the law's whirl. It's a time when all laws are suspended, allowing for unrestricted celebration, storytelling, and even minor mischief. It's a living symbol of the island's relationship with its laws. Fluid, interpretive, and deeply communal, and mysterious rituals, has managed to create a society that trusts not in rigid codes, but in shared signals. It's a world where the law is alive, not just written or spoken but felt. It reminds you that laws here are less about strict rules, and more about rhythms, flows of behavior that ebb and surge with the tides, the wind, and the people's will. You join the festivities, feeling the unspoken permission to be free. The flags aren't random. They're a dance of order and chaos, woven into the daily life of the island. By dawn, the flags return to their usual pattern, and order settles once more. Instead of hands or numbers, it has a collection of tiny flags, spinning slowly in the breeze, each inscribed with symbols you don't recognize. This is the flag clock, and it's as much a mood ring as a timekeeper. A fringe group believes it encodes messages from the island's ancient council's secret laws, communicated only through flag position and angle. Villagers tell you it doesn't track hours or minutes, but rather legal weather, and rotating the flags according to subtle signals from the elders and the natural world. They don't speak much but carry out their duties with precise care, as if the fate of the island depends on the angle of a flutter. You watch it for a while. The flags flutter uncertainly, changing directions and combinations. Historians still argue whether the flag clock is a relic from a lost timekeeping civilization or a symbolic tool invented in the 19th century to simplify complex laws for illiterate villagers. But she only smiles and points to the spinning flags, as if to say, "Let the law speak itself." You ask if the clock has ever broken. The village elder laughs softly. It breaks all the time. It's here you learn about the flag keepers, a small group of villagers charged with raising lowering. You try to strike up a conversation with one of them, a tall woman with weathered hands. The flag clock is surprisingly mesmerizing. One evening, during a rare full moon, the flag clock displays an unprecedented signal. All flags align vertically, spinning rapidly. But the law's whirl doesn't last long. You come to realize that the flag clock isn't just a device. As you watch the flags flutter in the morning breeze, you think about how this island, with its impossible laws, and maybe that's the real mystery. How do you govern a place where the law is everywhere and where every breeze carries a message, and where silence sometimes speaks louder than any decree? You smile, realizing that you might never fully understand this place. But somehow, that feels just right. You find yourself wandering to the edge of the island, where the cliffs drop sharply into the restless sea. Here, the wind carries more than just salt and spray. It carries stories. Old, tangled stories, whispered by fishermen who swear they've heard the ocean speak back. At the cliff's edge stands a weathered wooden sign. The law of the tides. A fisherman may only cast his nets when the moon is low and the tide high, or a ceremony must be performed exactly at the third rising tide after a full moon. These patterns are memorized and passed down orally. No charts, no watchers, just intuition and centuries of careful observation. Beneath it, a series of carved symbols spirals down into the stone like a secret code. You lean in to inspect and find yourself tracing shapes that look eerily like waves, footprints, and strange, looping characters. It turns out that the tides here are more than a natural phenomenon. They re a kind of living calendar, a sacred clock governing the island's rituals and legal observances. It's a reminder that their lives are not separate from the natural world, but part of its endless pulse. They chant quietly, holding hands, their voices rising and falling like the sea itself. Others vehemently oppose, fearing that fixing the laws on paper would break the cycle, making them rigid and lifeless. Offerings include shells, seaweed wreaths, and carefully balanced stones. People come here to seek favor, forgiveness, or clarity before important legal decisions or personal milestones. The argument is ongoing, with no clear resolution. A clever way to manage scarce resources and maintain social harmony. The ceremony lasts exactly 27 minutes, no more, no less, coinciding with the length of one full tide cycle. The sea hums low, a song you feel more than hear. You close your eyes and imagine the laws swirling in those waves, laws not just made by humans, but by the very rhythm of the earth and moon. Villagers explain that many laws only come into force during certain tidal cycles. Not just metaphorically, they're literally shaped by the tides and the moon's phases. This means that some laws vanish and reappear, sickly lawful today, unlawful tomorrow, and back again. You observe a group preparing for a ritual near the shore, timing their actions to the wave's rhythm. Historians still argue whether this tidal timing stems from an ancient form of ecosystem designed to keep human activity in balance with nature, or whether it is a more recent invention. A local elder confides in you that once, long ago, a lawbreaker tried to fish outside the tide's designated window. The sea, it is said, swallowed his boat whole, leaving only a ring of foam where it once was. Whether this is truth or legend, the story serves as a stern warning. Interestingly, you learn that the island's laws are sometimes described as fluid. This cyclical law system confounds outsiders, but creates a sense of connectedness among the islanders. You also discover an intriguing local debate. Some villagers want to record these tidal laws in writing to preserve them. Meanwhile, you notice small shrines along the coast, each dedicated to a different tidal deity or ancestral spirit. One evening, as you stand at the cliff's edge, the tide begins to rise. It's humbling and, somehow, comforting. In this place, where no one can quite pronounce the laws, the tides seem to speak perfectly. As your days drift by, you realize the island's laws aren't just about rules, they're stories. Stories told in shadows, whispers, pastries, tides, and flags. But the biggest story of all lies beneath your feet. The labyrinth of stones, hidden just outside the main village. The labyrinth is a sprawling maze carved from hundreds of smooth, black stones arranged in intricate patterns. No one knows exactly when it was built, some say centuries ago. Others argue it was a post-colonial creation designed to preserve the island's complex legal traditions. The labyrinth isn't just a puzzle, it's a map of veils, relationships, and ancient agreements. Each turn corresponds to a rule, each stone a precedent. Walk it right, and you reach understanding. Walk it wrong, and you risk confusion, or worse, exile from a conversation. You follow the path slowly, letting your fingers brush the stones. The loser nods in acceptance. No words are spoken, no appeals made. A local guide explains that villagers use the labyrinth to teach children the laws without reading or writing. One carving shows a figure holding a stone tablet that's melting like wax. The guide tells you it represents the island's ever-changing legal nature. How every step has brought you closer to a law you can quite pronounce, but somehow feel deep within. They walk the maze while elders recite stories. These stories shape the path, turning abstract legal concepts into tangible experiences. Some fringe theorists suggest that the labyrinth's design encodes the island's entire legal history in a pattern only visible from above, a code lost to time, but remembered in memory. The crowd holds its breath. The race is slow, deliberate, less about speed and more about intention. Historians still argue whether the labyrinth was originally a spiritual sanctuary, a political tool, or simply a clever way to get children to walk more. You're invited to participate in a ceremony within the labyrinth, where a dispute about land boundaries is settled not by speech, but by the chosen path. Each party selects a stone to start from, and their paths cross at a central circle. Whichever party reaches the circle first wins the dispute. It's a literal race around the law. You watch as two farmers begin the ritual, stepping lightly over moss and lichen, their faces a mixture of concentration and reverence. The winner smiles gently, not out of triumph, but relief. The labyrinth teaches that law isn't about fighting, it's about movement, presence, and understanding. You notice small carvings along the labyrinth walls, faces, animals, and strange symbols. There is a quiet wisdom here. Laws aren't meant to be set in stone, they meant to flow, adapt, and sometimes even dissolve. Later, as you rest beside the labyrinth's edge, you think about your own path here, and maybe, just maybe, that's what law really is. You start noticing an odd but charming phenomenon. People carry what look like tiny scrolls only. These aren't scrolls, they're threads. Thin, colorful strands, wound carefully around small wooden spools, dangling from belts, bags, and necks. These are the law threads, and they tell stories far more complex than any paper document ever could. They speak softly, then glance at their threads before responding, almost as if consulting a living, woven law book. Each thread corresponds to a legal concept or a personal obligation, and the colors and knots encode layers of meaning. A blue knot might mean promise kept, while a red twist signals debt owed. Some threads are simple, others intricately braided, almost like a secret code, only fully understood by the wearer and those close to them. The tapestry's patterns shift year to year, reflecting changes in the island's legal landscape and social dynamics. She explains that knots are promises, and loose ends are choices. It's a quiet, tactile handshake. She shows you a thread with an intricate knot, and says it represents a vow to protect the island's traditions. Another thread, frayed and thin, symbolizes a broken agreement or forgotten obligation. You watch as villagers gently touch their threads during conversations, using them almost like tactile punctuation or silent reminders. They embody the island's approach to law as something personal and communal, flexible yet binding. You understand, finally, that this island's laws are not laws in the way you expect. They're stories told in bread, whispered in caves, sung by tides, and woven in threads. Historians still argue whether the threads are a form of written law or something more akin to memory aids. Some scholars propose they are a practical evolution from oral traditions, an intermediate step between spoken word and written text. Fringe theories suggest the threads might even contain DNA strands or botanical fibers, encoding biological as well as legal information. You're fortunate enough to witness a thread ceremony held during the season when new laws are introduced or old ones expire. Villagers gather in the central square, unspooling their threads and weaving them into a massive communal tapestry. As each thread is woven, a story or law is quietly The tapestry is then displayed until the next ceremony, when it's carefully unraveled and stored. This ritual serves as a public acknowledgement of laws and social bonds, making the invisible visible, if only temporarily. You speak with a woman named Mara, a master thread weaver. Mara tells you that outsiders often misunderstand the threads as mere decoration, but to islanders, they are living lore, woven into the fabric of daily life. You noticed a subtle social rule. When two people meet, they often exchange a knot or a thread segment as a sign of trust or reconciliation. You try to ask what happens if someone loses their threads. Mara smiles mysteriously and says, then the law forgets them, until they weave themselves back in. You realize that these threads aren't just tools, they're bonds, reminders, and safeguards. This system is so unlike anything you've ever seen before, that it challenges everything you thought you knew about how societies govern themselves. On your last night, you watch the tapestry glisten under the moonlight, threads twisting and turning like living veins. They're the stories we live by, even when we can't quite say them out loud. The day you leave the island begins not with a farewell, but with a gift, a small cloth pouch, tied shut with twine, left quietly on your windowsill. Inside are three things: a slice of honey bread with thyme, a single violet thread coiled in a perfect spiral, and a smooth pebble with a spiral etched into one side. You don't ask who left it. You just nod quietly to the morning mist and begin your walk to the harbor. The villagers aren't avoiding you, but they aren't crowding you either. They watch with a kind of gentle solemnity, as if seeing off someone who now carries a piece of the island's mystery within them. As you pass familiar sights, the Law Rock, the labyrinth, the bakery, you notice something different. You pass a child humming a lullaby in the grandmother's tongue. You don't understand the words, but you understand the tune. It lingers in your chest longer than you expect. At the dock, you meet the ferry captain again, spoken not with tongues, but with tides, gestures, and shared silences. This place doesn't just have laws, it is the law, wrapped in stone and song and ceremony. The map isn't meant to guide you back. It's meant to remind you that you were here. You begin to forget the words, but not the feelings. You can't recall the exact pattern of the bread, the proper angle of the flag, or the full tune of the chants, but the rhythm, the weight, the rightness of it stays in your bones. A triumph of culture or an accident of geography, some even doubt it exists at all. Citing inconsistent coordinates and conflicting maps, he doesn't ask for a ticket or name. He simply gestures toward the boat. The laws are behind you, now not written down, not repeated out loud, but still somehow humming quietly inside your chest. They're meant to be felt, passed like stories around a fire, like bread passed from hand to hand, like threads tied between people who forget why they trust each other, but trust each other anyway. They flicker like candlelight behind your eyelids, soft and warm, not asking to be understood anymore, just to be remembered. But before you step aboard, he hands you a single, folded piece of parchment, an object you haven't seen once during your entire stay, an endless, and your thoughts begin to float gently, calmly, like they're moving in rhythm with something older than rules, older than words. Their tune has no lyrics, but it never forgets. At least, it appears blank. But when the paper catches the morning light just so, faint lines appear not of text, but of pathways, spirals, waves, threads. You carry those invisible laws with you woven into your dreams like threads, tied softly to the edge of sleep. And that's when it sinks in. You've spent all this time on an island where the laws couldn't be pronounced not because they were forgotten or forbidden, but because they were lived. Historians still argue whether the island is a utopia or a beautiful mess. You've learned the island's secret. Not every rule must be spoken. Some are better lived. Only kindness and memory and the quiet decision to treat the people around you with care, even when the words for how to do that slip out of reach, You don't argue. You just step aboard the ferry, holding the pouch tightly in one hand and the blank parchment in the other. As the island fades behind you, something strange happens. And maybe that's what the island always wanted. Not to be remembered perfectly, but remembered correctly. You close your eyes, letting the fairy rock you gently. Somewhere inside your bag, the violet thread waits patiently. Its knot is still loose. And somewhere behind you, on a hill not marked on any map, the laws continue to sing. So now, as the fairy rocks you gently away from that strange island where laws refuse to sit still, your mind starts to soften at the edges. You drift with that thought, the idea that maybe the most important things can't be fully said or even fully known. The wind outside your window slows. The sea beneath the boat stretches smooth. Maybe there was no law at all. Maybe there was only rhythm, only breath. You're safe now. You don't have to figure it all out. Just breathe. Let the tide carry you. You've walked the labyrinth, tasted the law bread, and heard the whispers in the dark. And now, as your body grows heavier and your eyes slip closed, good night.